On June 22nd, before the faint rays of daylight had fully illuminated the Tokmak-Melitopol railway, Ukraine's intelligence Kabil 9 shadow team was listening to the pulse of the Earth. Under the cracked fields, hidden sensor networks whispered every vibration of the steel wheels hitting the tracks to the command center like heartbeats, and every moving wagon was a lifeline filled with fuel. Commander Yevhen Thorn-Biryuk pressed his finger into the dry earth at the center of the map, and the first spark of the plan ignited. A single explosion would leave the entire southern front without fuel, and that spark gave birth to a sunless dawn that melted the rails on the night of June 22nd. We are now heading to this critical operation that is collapsing Russia's southern front's fuel and logistics artery. Get ready to discover every stage of the operation. Before we begin, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and turn on notifications. The first stage, preparation. GOR's Kabil 9 Special Reconnaissance Group spent May and June meticulously mapping the Tokmak-Melitopol line, memorizing every step along the way. Before the war began, this rail line carried daily grain wagons, but now it's filled with Russian occupation forces' heavy fuel tankers, and the smell of concrete sleepers mixes with the heavy smoke of diesel fuel along the tracks. 10 days before the summer solstice, Kabil 9 commander Yevhen Thorn-Biryuk leaned over the table at the Southern Defense Command headquarters and pressed his index finger firmly between Levadny and Molochansk.
This was a topographic basin, a bend hidden from potential surveillance radars. The surrounding farmlands appeared cracked from drought in satellite images, with the cracks extending toward the railway tracks like root veins.
The first item on the plan was to determine the exact number of trains on the railway line. IT specialists from the State Special Communications Service's NEXT group collected RF and GSM signal statistics over a 3-week period. The Russian logistics department frequently leaked the train movement schedule during the day, but the real goldmine was the infrared signals from the diesel locomotive's engine control units. As the temperature dropped in the early morning hours, friction heat was minimized, and diesel exhaust clouds cloaked the tracks in an invisible shroud. GOR analysts determined that the only time when the golden-colored stain from locomotive exhaust pipes was most clearly visible in satellite thermal reflections was the second hour following sunset, between 9:15 p.m. and 10:05 p.m. The special investigation team set up 3 separate passive listening sensors in the area to narrow the drone's firing range.
The first sensor was buried in a dried-up drainage channel beneath a slope sloping toward Molochanska.
The second was embedded in a concrete wedge-shaped structure against the ruins of a wall behind the Levadny farm depot. The third was placed among the remains of empty wagons coming from the Tokmak direction. This triangular sensor network captured the high-frequency vibrations caused by steel wheels striking the rails and transmitted them to the center via laser-modulated light pulses, not through cables, as cable detection had already become a reflex action for Russian counterintelligence patrols. On the morning of June 17th, during the first full chain test, the system detected even a local truck trailer colliding with the rail at the Tokmak exit and triggered an alarm. The margin of error had to be reduced to 0. At that point, the Alpha Special Forces team stepped in and marked the temporary trackside barriers with drone cameras. Metal bolt attachments were polished, and sensors were recalibrated. The second part of the strategy was the attack platform. 4 Bayraktar mini-class fixed-wing drones capable of carrying 20 kilograms of payload were taken out of the GUR warehouse, along with 3 Mugen 5 Pro-class gasoline-powered drones. The minis would conduct reconnaissance, while the Mugen 5s would carry out the kills. The explosive mixture selected was an 8.4 kilogram composite warhead reinforced with thermobaric powder dissolved in aviation fuel. Each warhead was designed to wrap around the remaining vehicles like a wall if any of the 11 tankers in the convoy were penetrated.
On the evening of June 20th, a trench dug in a circle in a cornfield north of Levadny became the drone container.
GUR engineers buried the GPS stabilization dual antenna in the ground and made the horizontal antenna invisible in the fog.
At the same time, artillery liaison officers from the Southern Defense Command raised the alert level of the 152mm Bodana self-propelled battery, stationed 17 kilometers inland near Shyrok. But this artillery fire was for the worst-case scenario. The real deadly blow would come from the air.
On the night of June 21st at 23:07, the sensor network detected the first real signal, but it was weak. It was identified as a 4-engine maneuvering set. Yevhen Biryuk said in a firm voice, "False alarm, but the timing is confirmed." The airdropped mine packages brought in from the Far East for the operation were checked once more. The detonators passed the movement test, and the fuel pumps tested their cartridges. At 5 a.m. on June 22nd, the final bolts were tightened in the drone assembly tent. Cyber experts from the Next group activated the portable station, cloning the Russian GSM cell. They replicated the train engineer's real-time connection with the Tokmak switch controller and returned the green signal message, indicating the track was clear. This would give the real engineer full confidence that the track was clear. At 1:15 p.m., as thin, scattered clouds filtered the sun like a stained sieve, Intelligence Officer Sofia transmitted the Red Whistle code from the Ukrainian personnel's wireless network. The train's departure was approved. The drone team installed the battery packs and switched to standby mode. The first acoustic sensor detected a high-pitched metallic ringing. The drained drainage channel trembled like a long needle, and the laser module displayed a bright yellow ring on the command laptop's screen. 3 seconds later, the second sensor's glowing line crossed the ring's diagonal arm, and the third sensor closed the angle. The train had entered the trap. The Bayraktar mini drone silently rose against the white-veined sky.
To maintain temperature, it locked the barometer at 150 meters and adjusted the lens to wide angle. The rail line appeared as a gray ribbon, with the diesel locomotive's hotspot clinging to it like an ant, centered on the screen.
11 tanker cars followed one after another. Cyber experts sent the signal confirmed, proceeding to the clone base station. The train was moving at a constant speed of 40 kilometers per hour. The locomotive's headlight, like a single yellow eye, struck the orange line of the sunset. In the next phase, it activated the Mugen 5 Pro number, 1 engine. The 2-stroke gasoline engine slightly cut through the silent breeze of the field, but the noise was lost in the crackling of corn stalks. At the same time, number 2 and number 3 also activated, and the 3 drones separated the takeoff line in a V shape. Despite the thermobaric payload in the heads weighing 8.4 kilograms, its effect would be calculated hell once it entered the tanker convoy. When the Bayraktar Mini transmitted the message, "Calibration complete, target locked," Yevhen Biryuk's thumb released the safety lock on the control. The train reduced its speed to 38 kilometers per hour as it entered the small curve at the Levadny exit. This curve was also the exact center of the sensor triangle. The middle of the tanker convoy made a slight noise against the rails, and at that exact moment, the wagon distance indicator marked the position. The 6th wagon was exactly in the middle after the locomotive. Mugen 5 number 1 increased its speed to 120 kilometers per hour with an altitude of 120 meters. On the screen, the 6th car was glowing bright red. The diesel fuel inside the tank cars had been heating up all day, and the metal hull was glowing like an oven in the thermal signature. The descent began. The drone's engine automatically shut off at 48 meters, and the wind friction against the wings produced a whoosh sound. The camera at the front of Mugen 5 couldn't even see the rail bed, but the laser point was perfectly aligned with the oval top of the 6th car. The warhead's fuse triggered the heat sensor with the impact shock. The mixture of diesel vapor and aviation gasoline, atomized by the thermobaric wave, consumed the oxygen inside. The first flame erupting from the top of the car tore off the twisted chimney like a rotten tooth turned upside down and hurled it away. 3 milliseconds later, as the nozzle pressure dropped, the internal containment wall of the tanker ruptured, and liquid diesel struck the sides of the car, cracking the metal hull like a stress test shell. The fire raced backward through the fuel supply lines, latching onto the ventilation chimney on the 7th car's roof. The second Mugen 5 entered the side wagon space. It was not difficult to target the swaying train because the wagon tops had turned into a halo of flames. The headstock penetrated the zinc-coated steel roof at a point thought to be impenetrable, like a pencil-piercing paper. The entire train began to bounce forward and backward. The third Mugen didn't care whether the train was braking or not. It veered at a 35-degree angle into the front of the fuel tanker immediately behind the locomotive and exploded. The front windows of the diesel locomotive cabin burst inward under the force of the orange wave, and the map roll above the engineer's seat stuck to the side like a greasy rag. The engineer and assistant were trapped in the iron box beneath the 1,100-degree fireball.
The first tear in the cloud column rose 60 meters.
The airflow connected the rising flames, and black smoke merged like a torn curtain opening to the sky. The fuel buildup turned the entire train into a chain of fire, with flames roaring from one car to the next. The first red-orange glow visible to the human eye turned into a layer of crimson-black smoke within the next 80 seconds.
The massive heat cloud melted the rail steel. The wooden sleepers of the traverses turned a fiery red almost instantly, and small cracks could be heard in the concrete traverses. The rail line began to bend into an L shape. The car bodies were wedged together like bone joints, but the sixth car's underframe broke free after the explosion and slid into the field, sinking into the mud. The impact of its collision tore the locomotive from the buffer. Half of the locomotive's main diesel block came off the tracks, leaving a trail in the soft soil. The high-speed turbo's embers were no longer fueled by fire. The heat cloud had reached a diameter of 100 meters, rising upward through the bell-shaped funnel into the atmosphere, blending orange and black, with the pure diesel vapor sharp and the lubricating smoke sweet and bitter. At that moment, the Bayraktar Mini was still in the air, the explosion cloud flickering on the camera like a second sunrise, the bright white glow from the fire overwhelming every contrast on the screen in night vision mode. Russian emergency response teams in the area had just received the fire call over the radio, but entering the core of the heat seemed impossible even from the asphalt 5 kilometers away. When the fire engulfed a wagon, the fuel inside shot 40 meters into the sky, and the smoke cloud turned the starless sky into a tar-black curtain. The Tokmak Melitopol military command post realized that the train line had been cut off and that supply flows would be halted for at least 3 days, even as the long trail of explosions continued unabated. The fuel spilled on the ground, spread like a wick, and the vaporizing mixture exploded like small bombs when it came into contact with sparks.
The flames could not be contained, and firefighters in thermal gear could only approach as far as the edge of the adjacent field.
The rail track was measured at over 650 degrees Celsius at the time, the steel nearly elastic at that temperature, with the track bolts melting like wax candles.
As the night's darkness struggled with the smoke curtain, Russian officials still did not use the term sabotage attempt, but satellite images showed a black smoke halo 14 kilometers wide, with rings drawn around the explosion center. At 4:30 a.m., the fire was still burning in places, but the skeleton of the flames had begun to die down, and the bent rails were clearly visible. Metal debris scattered across the area blocked the roads, and the temporary bridge lines were already exceeding the repair capacity of the Russian-controlled lines. This narrow stretch between Lavadny and Molochansk was the sole fuel supply line for armored brigades, artillery batteries, ammunition depots, and even air defense batteries operating around Tokmak. According to a report published the next day by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, 980 tons of fuel were being transported daily along the same route, but the operation reduced this amount to zero within 24 hours. Satellite analysis company Black Sky confirmed in a set of images published on June 23rd that the train wreckage was scattered across a 431-meter strip. The rail infrastructure was bent at 12 separate points, and the roofs of the wagons that had been blown into the air were scattered across an area with a radius of 250 meters. The Russian Defense Ministry initially described the incident as a technical malfunction resulting in a fire, but images leaked to local social media channels showed axial holes piercing the top of the carriages and the angle of flight, making it impossible to deny a drone attack. The Ukrainian General Staff added a single sentence to its evening statement: "Without fuel, tanks cannot move." The operators of Kabil 9 were retreating hours after the explosion. crossing earthen embankments as the sky remained crimson. Every breath was diesel, every step was coal black. None of them could say how many kilometers away the rising smoke could be seen, but they all knew they were witnessing the closure of a vital logistics artery in the glow of that smoke.
And in war, sometimes only one line breaks, and then all memories turn black.
The Tokmak-Melitopol railway line was also engulfed in this darkness on the night of June 22nd.